You grew up in Germany. Where in Germany?
I was born in the little town of Hameln, Hameln. If you have heard of the Piper of Hamelin, that's a story that many children have heard, whether they lived in Germany or whether they lived in the United States. Do you know the story?
I know the Pied Piper. I didn't know where he was from.
He was engaged by the city council to rid the city of rats and other vermins, and he didn't get paid. So he took out his little musical instrument, the pipe, and piped all the children of the city into the Weser River. That was a sad story.
A fairy tale? The Pied Piper?
That's right.
Okay?
Oh, okay.
Now, how can I continue?
Keep going.
I was born in 1927. Therefore, today I'm 67 years old. And I grew up in a little village which was approximately 30 to 40 minutes from Hamelin, called Hess-Oldendorf, Hess Oldendorf, which was a village that had one or two bakeries. Children liked ice cream, so they had an ice cream man on the main street every day, practically. And they had one or two butcher shops. And my father was in the cattle business. He and his brother, two brothers, were in that business together. What did they do? They imported Holstein cows and Frisian bulls to this little town and then sold them to the farmers in the surrounding territories. So he was a cattle merchant. Some of the animals were not worthy of being sold to the farmers for milk or for beef, and they were sent to slaughterhouses. We, in the beginning, had no vehicles, no motor vehicles. These animals were transported by horse and wagon to the surrounding farmers. Later on, we were probably the only ones, or the first ones, in business that had a Mercedes truck that would transport these animals. And we had two other automobiles. One was I remember a Ford Eiffel. These were all very small cars, a little bit larger than what were the Volkswagen subsequently. And with, my mother took care of the home, but we had a very nice home. As children, my brother and I had a nanny and another woman that took care of the household work. And my mother tried to drive a car, and she was involved in an accident, and she never drove again. Now, I, in the beginning, had no fear of going out with my buddies at the public high schools, or not high schools, but grammar schools. And, toward 95 or 96 or 97, all of a sudden we were no longer acceptable citizens. And people that did business with my parents, with my father, were reported to the Gestapo. And soon the business was closed, and we couldn't even buy meat at the butcher shop. And so my father went to the countryside and got goats, and we slaughtered them, and we ate them, and we had little rabbits, which I hated to see killed, but they were eaten. And my father was a councilman, so to speak, in the military. But my uncle, my mother's brother, was apparently a soldier that deserved the Iron Cross First Class. And neither my father, my uncle, or my mother's brother never thought that Germany would touch them because they were heroes or soldiers in the First World War.
Was that true to a certain extent?
I don't think so. I don't think so. What was your question?
Was there a period of time where he was treated differently because of his experience in World War I?
My answer to that would be, I don't think so. Because I didn't live in they lived in my uncle, the one that got the Iron Cross, lived in a very, very small village called Ottenstein, which was approximately 2 hours away from the village that I lived in. And we visited them occasionally because my mother's mother and son and daughter-in-law and granddaughter lived in that little village.
What was your understanding of what was happening? You got the anti-Semitism, you got all of the things that are going on with your food and your family. What were you told? What was your understanding at that time of what was happening? Do you recall?
I just knew that, the brown shirts, they were called the SA. They were the ruffians that on one occasion, I think it was Kristallnacht, sometime in 1938, I think it was in September or November, came into the house and shut the lights out, and the milk cans were thrown through the windows. And one of my aunts had heart problems and was having some kind of seizure. And my mother said there were people congregated outside of the house and shouted, "We need a doctor," and there was some comment or some of the public said, "You don't need a doctor, you need a veterinarian," see? And we were, of course, afraid that something would happen to us physically. But nothing did happen physically to us at that time.
For some of the Germans, anti-Semitism was all they remembered. They grew up born into it, it's all they remembered. For others, they had a relatively normal childhood, and anti-Semitism seemed to take them by storm overnight.
But there are
Which side would you feel you fell on?
I think most of them were passive anti-Semitics.
More latent.
Yes, and maybe they thought that if they didn't participate, they themselves would be persecuted or prosecuted. My brother went to a private high school and considered the principal of that public, not public, that private school, a friend. And after the war, we received letters from some of the officials of the community that said, you know, we were never really Nazis, and we want you to give us a written statement to that effect. We would consider that a very kind act if you would do that, you see. And it may be that, you know, my father in some instances did, and in other instances did not, you see. Or do you understand what I'm saying?
Why would he have?
What's that?
Just curious, why, to give a statement?
Well, because they probably thought that the military justice would, or the military would deal kindly with them if they could, and would give them preferred status, and would give these Germans preferred status in business and government.
No, I'm sorry. Why would your father have given them the letter? That's what I'm saying.
Because he thought perhaps they were either forced or kindly disposed toward us. Okay?
Okay. Crystal knot.
Well, I explained that to you. I don't know why this happened to me twice, but when I could no longer go to school in this little village as Oldendorf, my parents sent me to Düsseldorf, which is a town near Cologne, which was a pretty big city. And my uncle Max Westfield was an artist, and he lived there. And they had a Jewish school, so I could go to a Jewish school, and did go there for maybe 6 or 9 months. And while I was there, one night the Nazis came and threw all of the furniture out of the window, and his portraits and other artwork were slashed with knives, and they destroyed much of the furniture and other items in the apartment. It was a condo. And when they came to the room that I was in, they opened the door and they shut it. They didn't do anything.
Why do you think that was?
I don't know. I don't know.
And you were how old? Maybe 12,
12.
13, 12?
I was 13 when I left for England. Was just before the war broke out, maybe a few weeks or a month or so. I was with a children's transport that allowed me to go, not with my parents, but with a lot of other Jewish children, to England. And there I was in London. And then when the war broke out, almost immediately, the bombers came over there and blitzed London practically every night. And then the English government decided it was too dangerous for all children to be in London. So all of the English and all of the children, regardless of their origin, were sent to smaller cities in England. And I was sent to Northampton, which was a shoe manufacturing town in England. But even there, the V-bombs came over, and some of them struck pretty close, but it was, you know, everybody was afraid, even in Northampton, but these V-bombs came over, and we were said, don't worry about, when you can hear them, nothing is going to happen. It's when they stop, when the motor stops, that's when you'll hear the explosion, okay?
So you were sent over on the kinder transport when you were
Yes.
12,
Yes,
right before the war broke out?
Yes.
After Kristallnacht.
yes.
Where were your parents?
They came on their own maybe a few weeks later. I mean, you
How
know,
was that? Do you remember being separated from them?
No,
Remember-
because I was in Düsseldorf, and I was sent from Düsseldorf on the children's transport. I don't know whether they would have had children's transports from these smaller villages. But, I mean, I don't know. Maybe some of these children in the smaller villages were sent to, to Berlin or to Hamburg or to some of the bigger cities and were then combined and transported to England. Most of them, I mean, I don't know what Hedy Lustig said. I don't think she went to England, did she?
No.
She
Canada.
probably, yeah. And we went from Germany to England, and I stayed there for about a year or a little longer. And then from England, we came through Montreal to New York to Nashville.
There are survivors who said the Holocaust could not have taken place without the help of its countrymen, that the Nazis might have led it, but the great betrayal lied in the doctors and the teachers and the neighbors that people lived with every day.
Well, I would think that's right.
Do you believe that?
Yeah.
How do you feel about the Germans that say they really didn't know what was happening?
I don't believe that they didn't know. The German government invited me to go back, and I did go back. And I talked to the citizens of Oldendorf. They invited me, and I stayed there for close to a week, I would say. And some of the people I remembered, they were school children at the same time that I was there. And most of them were my age. There were some that were older. But I said, maybe I was wrong, but I said, you're my age. So you were 12 or 13 when I left. And I can't blame you for what your parents have done. Okay? And I said, I'm here not to accuse you. I'm here to try to build some bridges if I can. Maybe if I had been sent to a concentration camp, maybe I couldn't have said that.
How do you feel about that? I'll expand on that for a second. We have another survivor that had said she feels a great amount of guilt.
But that she
of
lived
getting
or he
out,
lived?
Getting out.
Well, why should I feel guilty about that?
So you don't feel that way?
No. If I hadn't gotten out, I would be a lampshade. Might have been a lampshade.
What about your family? Did you have any family that...
There were some people, and I started to practice law when I became a lawyer, and I took restitution cases for some of the people that you might have already talked to. And, they received an amount of money, depending on whether they were in concentration camps or whether they were in business or whether they had a loss of education. I had a loss of education, so they paid me, I don't know how much, I think it was something like $10,000. So most people that were my age could have gotten that maybe from the German government under the law that was passed.
Had you any idea at the time what you were actually escaping from?
I don't know.
Being at the age of 12, you're still a child yet.
I know,
grew up very fast in 2 years.
I knew that we were no longer able to associate with what I considered to be former friends.
How do you feel about that?
Well, that was pretty bad.
Would you say that that's where the great betrayals lied for you? Was in the friends that had turned?
Yeah, and they were indoctrinated. If you have a propaganda machine that is constantly saying Jews are rats, you believe Jews are rats.
Do you understand
And they had them, and we could I remember I was told no longer can you go to public movies or things like that. But I went anyhow.
You did.
And at that time, Jews were not required to wear the Star of David. If I had to do that, if I had worn that, I would not have gone to the movies anymore if the law prohibited it.
German Jews often felt more German than Jewish.
Well, that's true. In other words, they thought that
There's a
that's
great
what
sense of pride in
that's
being
what they
German.
thought about wearing an Iron Cross first class, that they would not be harmed because they had done their duty to the fatherland.
How do you feel about that? Did you feel betrayed by the entire country? Was it, do you remember being in touch with any of those feelings when you had moved? Obviously, the time you left, there were no death camps, but there certainly were
They
labor
probably,
camps that started.
yeah, they.
Do you remember finding out later what actually took place
Oh, sure.
for the next 6 years after you left? 5 years?
Yeah, I
Do you
found
remember
out.
that?
Yeah, I mean,
you
you
remember
know,
having any feelings?
my mother's brother, Otto Kornberg, and his blind mother and grandchild and the brother's wife all went to concentration camps and died and were killed. I mean, they didn't come back.
What do you think when you think about that?
Well, I think it's a travesty.
It was absolutely unheard of that there were factories that were killing and torturing Jews, especially around 1938 and 39. All the way up until 44.
We're talking about a specific episode of history. And I can't believe that people could be so, what should I say, so indoctrinated that they could actually just murder. That's what happened in concentration camps. From a historic standpoint, if you go back to historically, you'll find that I think you'll find that religious wars have occurred since history has been kept, whether it was between Catholics and Christians, or whether it's been Christians and Jews. But I mean, we remember this because it's just one generation ago. And that's why you're putting this off record, so that people won't forget this. And, and that this will not happen again.
Do you think that we remember it because it was so close?
Yes.
Or because it is considered the greatest act of inhumanity of all time?
Both.
Because there have been genocides. There's
Yeah.
genocides going
Yeah.
on right now.
Yeah.
The systematic murder and torture of 6 million Jews.
Yeah, I can't understand it, but it happened, and
How
maybe
do you try to understand it? What do you tell your children? What do
I
you
don't
tell-
have any.
What do you tell other children? What do you tell people when they say, how could this have happened?
I tell them that they have to stand up for their rights. And for others, for the rights of others. Because if you don't stand up for the minority, then you may be in the minority sometime in the future.
So you subscribe to the famous poem of not standing up for somebody because they weren't Jewish, they weren't Catholic, until they needed someone to stand up for them. There was no one left.
I don't know that sort of general, but probably so.
What do you want people to know about what happened? You were speaking in front of 38th graders.
I don't know whether an 8th grader really would understand what, what happened and what they could have done as 8th graders to have prevented a Holocaust. It's the parents that need a re-education. I mean, but I know this, this communication that we're attempting to give to school children ought to be known by the grown-ups of our generation.
When you meet with other survivors.
But the grown-ups are the ones that are going to teach their future children. So I mean, you attempt to teach the children, which is fine, but if you can communicate the wrongness of the situation to the grown-ups, then you would do a good job for history.
When you talk to other survivors in the community and meet with other survivors, is there a sense of relief? Is there a sense of community? Do you feel in a sense of camaraderie with them having escaped? Or do you feel that because perhaps you escaped earlier, that you somehow survived some serendipitous style of getting here by luck? And
I think it was very lucky for me to have escaped, just a few weeks maybe before the borders were closed.
mm-hmm. Were you religious growing up?
My parents belonged to a conservative congregation in Hamelin. We had no synagogue except prayer rooms in this village of ours, and my father was a senior member of a small council, and we had 3 Torahs in this little village, and I don't know how they were smuggled out of Germany, but I had 3 of them in my home. Gave one of them to a community, to the temple here, and one of them to a community in Blyville, and I still have one. And I don't know how they got out, because the people that supervise the packing of our lifts, those were big Torahs. These were not model. Mm-hmm. They must have been bribed or something. I don't know how they got out.
Is there anything you'd like to add?
No.
Nothing?
Could you talk a little about, I think you said you came through Canada and then New York and then Nashville. Mm-hmm. What got you to Nashville? What brought you to Nashville?
Well, people had to give affidavits. Affidavit meant that you wouldn't fall a burden to the government of the United States. And I think my father was able to smuggle some money to some distant relative here in Nashville that had sufficient dollars to cover themselves. I mean, you know, you either needed close relatives that would do it without the collateral, or you would have to have the collateral in some way.
Came here with your family.
Yeah.
You were 12, 13?
I was 13 when I was in England. I was either 13 or 14 when I came over here to the United States. I think we came over here in 1941. The war was going on, and we came over here by convoy. Submarines attacked, and I didn't see any of the ships go down, but we felt pretty safe because there were maybe 30, 40 ships in that convoy, and when you could see so many ships around you, you felt pretty safe. The name of the ship that I was on was called RMS Antonia.